Friends, New Year always feels like, for me, like standing at the edge of something unknown, like a blank page waiting to be written. It's exciting, but it can also be a little unsettling. The path ahead is so uncertain, while the year behind holds many valuable lessons. Yet it doesn't come with a map for what's next. And I'm wondering if you have ever felt that tension in your life as you step into a new year. You know, the mix of hope and hesitation as you start something new. I know I have, especially my family and I, when we left Indonesia to begin a new chapter here in Canada, the journey brought moments of doubt and fear, but it also brought countless reminders that God is faithful. And again, before we say goodbye to Indonesia and our family, God kind of like whispered to me, I'm with you, Daniel. What else do you need? I'm with you, Daniel. What else do you need? In the shower, while I was driving, while I was having dinners. Like, this sentence flashing through my mind. So, this morning as we reflect on the story of Esther, we are reminded that stepping into the unknown has always been part of walking with God. Let me say it again. Stepping into the unknown has always been part of walking with God. Esther's story shows us that no matter where we are or what lies ahead, God is already at work, preparing you and me for such a time as this. Now let's set the scene together. Esther, a young Jewish woman, finds herself in an extraordinary and unexpected position. She is the queen of Persia. Imagine the kind of contrast this will have been for her. A young woman, an orphan, raised by her cousin Mordecai, now in the royal palace of the most powerful empire at that time. However, behind her royal robes and the luxury of her position is a deep and unspoken truth. She is a Jewess, and her people, the Jews, are under grave threat. The villain of the story is Haman, high-ranking official in King Xerxes' court. He is a man filled with hatred, racism, and pride. And in his position of power, he is a dangerous man. He convinced the king to issue a decree that all Jews in the Persian Empire should be destroyed. This decree, once signed, cannot be undone, and its consequences are catastrophic. The Jews have no defense, no power, and no way to protect themselves. Their lives are at the mercy of Haman's evil plan. In Esther chapter 4, Mordecai, Esther's cousin and father figure in this story, hears this terrible decree. And he tears his clothes, puts on sackcloth and ashes, and mourns publicly in the streets. It's a sign of grief and desperation, but also a cry for help. He is deeply troubled and knows that the only hope for the Jews is if Esther can intervene, if she can plead their case before the king. However, there is a significant problem. Esther's approach to the king is not something to be taken lightly. The king's court is a place of strict protocol. Anyone who approaches the king without an invitation risks execution, unless the king extends his golden scepter as a sign of mercy. So Esther has no guarantees here. She could lose everything, including her life. Her fear is so real, and her hesitation is understandable. In the middle of this crisis, Mordecai, seeing the weight of the moment, speaks these famous words. And who knows, but that you have come to your royal position for such a time as this. Friends, these words are not just a call to action. They are a profound reminder. Mordecai is calling Esther that even though her situation feels impossible, she is not there by accident. God has placed her in this position at this very moment for this very purpose, for such a time as this. The fear, the uncertainty, and the danger are real, but so is the opportunity. So, Mordecai's words resonate with us even today. Esther's story is not just a historical account of one woman's bravery in the past. Friends, it's a reminder that God has placed each of us right where we are at this moment of history for a purpose, for such a time as this. Just as Esther had her moment to step up, so too do we. And sometimes our such a time as this may come when we least expect it, in the midst of our own fears and uncertainties. Now, Mordecai's words are a call to clarity for such a time as this. He is not asking Esther to look for another time or wish for different circumstances to act something. He is essentially saying, Esther, this is the moment God has prepared you for. Isn't it often easier to wish that we were in a different time or place? To say, like, if only things were simpler or clearer or safer, then I will act. But God's purpose are not bound by our comfort zones. Esther's position as queen was not an accident, and neither are the places where God has placed us. We may long for easier or more familiar circumstances, but often it's in the challenging or unfamiliar times that God does His most powerful and beautiful work. It's in challenging and unfamiliar times your God does His most powerful and beautiful work for such a time as this. For me, this truth resonates deeply. As many of you know, I came to Canada as a foreigner under student visa, leaving behind my home country of Indonesia, my extended family, and all the familiarity of the place where I grew up and born. Serving God's people here in Canada has been both a profound privilege, but also a journey of faith. There are moments when I deeply miss my family, like on birthdays, during gatherings, Christmas, special holidays, or even in the simple act of having conversation over meals with them. There are days when I wonder, why has God brought me here? So far from everything I've known. But every time I wrestle with those questions, God reminds me, for such a time as this, my journey was not accidental. God has prepared me and placed me here, even in the unknown, to serve Him and to walk alongside you, God's people. Just as He had a purpose for Esther in the palace, He has a purpose for each one of us, even in places and situations we didn't choose. So as we begin this new year, I want to invite you to pause for a moment and then reflect on where God has placed you for such a time as this. Why are you here in Lethbridge? Have you asked that question? Why are you here in this town? Why is it that you and I and our families are part of this congregation at St. Andrews for worship and fellowship? What people or circumstances are surrounding you right now? Could it be that just like Esther and like me, you are exactly where you need to be for God to work through you for such a time as this? Friends, we don't always see the big picture of God's plan. We often wonder why things happen the way they do or question why we find ourselves in certain seasons. But here's what we can trust. God is working through every moment. every season, every circumstance. If you have ever felt out of place or uncertain, remember this. God's purpose for you is not tied to your comfort or familiarity. I know that for real in my own life. It's about His greater plan. The world doesn't revolve around us. We are not the center of the universe. It's not about us. It's about God and His goodwill, both for you and for the world. Your God is not a genie in the bottle, existing to grant our wishes or to fulfill our personal plans on demand. Your God and Esther's is the sovereign creator of all things, working out His purposes in a ways far greater than we could ever imagine. His plans are not limited to our desires, personal agendas, nor His timing bound to our schedules. Instead of bending to our will, God invites us to align our hearts with His. He calls us to step into the story He's writing, trusting that His ways are higher than ours and His purposes are always good. So right now, even in the uncertainty and challenges you might face, your God is at work. He has placed you here in this moment, not by accident, but by divine design for such a time as this. And I understand that fear of trusting God for such a time as this can bring fear to life. And fear can paralyze us. Fear of failure, fear of judgment, fear of the unknown. These are all real emotions that can hold us back from stepping into the moments God has prepared for us. Esther certainly faced fear. She was a queen, yes, but in a foreign land. And approaching the king uninvited was a serious risk. It could cost her life. Yet in that moment, she made the choice to act in faith despite the fear. My friends, fear is not something we can easily control, but we can choose to respond to it. Esther's response is a powerful example. When Mordecai challenged her, urging her to step up, Esther did not rush into action just blindly. What did she do? She took time to pray and then fast and gather strength from God before taking the bold step forward. She understood that God was calling her to act. And though she feared the consequences, she chose to trust in God's faithfulness. Fear is a natural part of stepping into God's purpose. It's okay to feel fear, but it's not okay to let fear stop us from moving forward. It's in the face of fear that faith is most powerful. As we step into this new year, there may be moments where we feel overwhelmed and afraid. We might fear sickness, new diagnosis from the doctor, failure, rejection, or simply the unknown of what lies ahead. But just like Esther, we can move forward with the confidence that we are not alone. God is with us in our fear. So, what does it look like to step through fear in our own lives? Well, it means acknowledging the fear, not denying it, but then choosing to move forward instead. Trusting that God is with us and will guide us through. It means seeking His strength through prayer, fasting, and leaning into His promises. And like Esther, we may not see the full picture, but we can trust that God will equip us for whatever He's calling us to do. We see that Esther's decision to act was not just about her courage or fear. It was ultimately about trusting in God's sovereignty. Esther did not know how things would turn out when she approached the king. Yet she chose to trust that God had been working even long before she stepped onto the scene. She trusted that God's plan for her people was greater than her fear, and that her actions, though small in her eyes, were part of a much bigger purpose. Friends, God's sovereignty means that He is in control of all things, even the moments that feel out of our control. And here's the thing, God doesn't just step in when we ask. He is always already at work. He is always moving in our lives, preparing us, guiding us, putting us in places where we can be part of His redemptive plan. Just as Esther's rise to power was not just a random accident, neither are the circumstances of our lives. God has positioned us exactly where we are for His purpose. And we are invited to participate in His work, to step into the roles He has set before us, whether we see them clearly or not. My friends, as the story shows us that God works through both the seen and the unseen, through the ordinary and the extraordinary. She was living in a foreign kingdom, and yet God had placed her there for a specific purpose at the precise moment her people needed her. You see every detail. Her rise to become queen, the timing of the king's mood at that time, the unfolding of the plot was under God's sovereign hand. All these details. And we don't always see God's sovereignty at work, especially in the middle of difficult circumstances. We may not understand why things happen the way they do, but trusting in God's sovereignty means having the faith that God is in control all the time, even when we don't see the whole picture. And this doesn't mean everything will go easy or go as we want it. But it does mean that we can rely on God's wisdom, God's timing and purpose. My friends, the beauty of God's sovereignty is that He is always at work in our lives, even when we don't recognize it. We are not passive observers. We are invited to actively participate in His ongoing work. Just as Esther had to choose to step forward, we too are called to trust that God has already been working to align ourselves with His will. So again, as we step into this new year, 2025, we can carry the same trust in God's sovereignty. Whatever challenges, whatever uncertainties you may face, know this: your God is still at work. He has placed you where you are for such a time as this. His plan is greater than our understanding. His ways are always perfect, even when they don't make sense to us. And He's calling us to be active participants in His unfolding story. The phrase "for such a time as this" reminds us that God is always working, even when we don't fully understand it. In Esther's story, we see God's purpose unfolded in ways that Esther could never have predicted. Again, imagine a Jewish orphan, unlikely to influence the Persian Empire, rises to become queen and plays a significant role in saving her people. Esther's courage and faith in stepping into the unknown changed the course of Israelites' history. And we may wonder why certain events unfold the way they do, or questions God's timing. But here's something I have come to realize. Friends, it's better that we do not know everything God is doing or why He's doing it. If we were to know every detail, every reason behind God's plan, it might rob us of the trust, faith, and joy that comes from living before the mystery of God's sovereignty. Friends, there is beauty in the unknown, in being able to rely on God's wisdom and timing rather than our own understanding. Imagine if we had every answer, if we knew why everything happens the way it does. It might make life feel more predictable. But it will also take away the opportunity for faith, the chance to step into moments with courage, even when the path isn't clear. It will lessen the glory of walking by faith rather than by sight. Part of the adventure of following God is trusting Him with the unknown, knowing that His plans are always good and always for our good. So as we look ahead to this year, and we do not know everything that's coming, we don't need to understand every reason beyond the challenges or blessings we will face. What we need is to trust the one who holds all things in His hands. The God who shaped Esther's story is the same God who is shaping yours. His purposes are greater than anything we can comprehend. So friends, let's make it our resolution this year to live faithfully, moment by moment, day by day, week by week, month by month, trusting that God is always in control. There is this beautiful prayer by Saint Richard of Chichester that captures this trust so well. Day by day, dear Lord, of these three things I pray: to see Thee more clearly, to love Thee more dearly, to follow Thee more nearly, day by day. Friends, sometimes the best way to live out this prayerful attitude is by weaving simple yet heartfelt prayers into the everyday tasks of life. Even the most mundane chores can become moments of grace when we bring God into them. Some of the examples that I want to share with you: while you are washing your hands or you're grabbing a drink, say this prayer: thank you, Father, for clean water. While you're getting dressed, clothe me in your righteousness, O Jesus. During a chat with a friend or stranger, silently whisper in your heart, Lord, bless and keep this person in front of me. Anytime and at all, Lord, have mercy. Jesus, help me. It's amazing, my friends, how short yet frequent prayers can create a deeper sense of God's presence than an occasional lengthy prayer. By sprinkling these brief, honest prayers throughout your day, while walking, while talking, while working, you will find that God's closeness is never far. And by the way, this is a very practical way to remember that God is always with us, working through us, right here, right now, for such a time as this. Amen.